It was just another night at the Granby until a simple phone call changed everything. The man who seemed insignificant revealed himself as the master of the game, and the young executives who mocked him now trembled in their seats. What comes next? Only true leaders will know how to handle it. The buzz of the luxurious grand restaurant filled the air, while executives in expensive suits occupied the main tables. In the most discreet corner, almost hidden by an ornate column, a man in a worn suit observed everything in silence. His face, marked by time and his tired posture, made him practically invisible to the exclusive clientele of the place. At the central table, a group of young executives celebrated their most recent hostile acquisition. Champagne glasses clinked, while they boasted about how they had managed to take control of another traditional company. "Did you see old Wilson's face when we signed the contract? That dinosaur didn't even realize what was happening until it was too late," boasted Richard Thornton, the leader of the group, his Rolex gleaming under the restaurant lights. Laughter echoed through the environment, some deliberately directed at the solitary man in the corner. "Hey, look! We have another fossil around here too. How did they let him in with that suit?" provoked Philip Montgomery, a minority partner in the group. The man in the worn suit merely brought the glass of red wine to his lips, his eyes fixed on a distant point. The discreet figure seemed not to care about the provocations, which only encouraged the group even more. "He must be one of those retired executives who can't accept that their time has passed," commented Thornton, adjusting his Italian silk tie. "The market belongs to the young now, right, guys?" It was at this moment that the old cell phone on the man's table began to ring, a flip phone model that seemed to have come from another decade. The discreet sound was enough to create a small pause in nearby conversations. With calculated movements, he answered. "Yes," he said only, his deep and controlled voice echoing unexpectedly, imposingly. "You may proceed." When he hung up the phone, something had changed in his posture. The tired air gave way to a presence that suddenly seemed to fill the entire room. For the first time that night, the young executives really looked at him. The maitre d' of the restaurant approached hurriedly, his expression a mixture of respect and apprehension. "Mr. Harrison, forgive me for not recognizing you earlier. Your usual table is always reserved, please." "Here is fine, Anthony," the man replied, a discreet smile on his lips. The name caused a visible impact on the group at the central table. Harrison, Alexander Harrison. The doors of the restaurant opened, and a delegation of senior executives entered the room. They weren't just ordinary executives. They were the presidents and CEOs of the biggest corporations in the country, all headed directly to the table of the man in the worn suit. "Mr. Harrison," respectfully greeted Charles Wilson, the same man the group of young people had mentioned moments before. "The board is assembled as requested." Richard Thornton choked on his champagne. Alexander Harrison was a living legend in the corporate world, the man who had built the largest business conglomerate in North America from scratch. His reputation as a ruthless strategist was whispered in the corridors of all major companies. Years ago, he had stepped away from the spotlight, delegating the management of his empire to trusted executives, but his power and influence remained unshakable. Harrison stood up, adjusting his worn suit, the same one he wore when he closed his first big deal decades ago. He walked to the table of the young executives, who now seemed to have lost all their previous arrogance. "So you think the market belongs to the young?" he asked, his calm voice carrying a weight that made the air dense. "Interesting, especially considering that all the companies you've acquired in recent months are, in fact, indirect subsidiaries of the Harrison Group." The silence that followed was deafening. The young executives paled upon realizing the extent of their situation. Not only had they mocked one of the most powerful figures in the corporate world, but they also discovered that their apparent success had been carefully orchestrated. "Your acquisitions were, let's say, supervised," continued Harrison, pulling up a chair and sitting at their table. "Each contract, each negotiation, each move was observed. And now, gentlemen, let's discuss the true purpose of this social experiment." The senior executives remained standing, forming a respectful semicircle around the table. The entire restaurant seemed to have entered a state of suspension, all attention focused on that surreal scene. But first, Harrison paused, his eyes scanning each young face before him. "I think you should reconsider your opinions about dinosaurs. After all, they ruled the Earth for much longer than humans ever will." Power wasn't in expensive suits or luxury watches. It was in experience, patience, and the ability to see the entire board while others only saw the next move. Alexander Harrison had spent decades building his empire, and now it was time to teach a valuable lesson to the new generation. The silence at the Grand was absolute as Alexander Harrison opened his worn leather briefcase as old as his suit. With precise movements, he began to arrange documents on the table, each page revealing a web of business connections that made the young executives sink deeper into their chairs. "Thornton Enterprises," began Harrison, his calm voice filling. "The environment, founded 3 years ago with initial capital of questionable origin. Interesting how they got approval so quickly from the regulatory board." His eyes met those of Richard Thornton, who had now lost all his previous arrogance. "Mr. Harrison." "Oh, he didn't," Philip Montgomery tried to intervene, but was silenced by a simple raising of eyebrows from the veteran. "Montgomery Holdings," continued Harrison, moving to the next document, "a company that emerged from nowhere and, in just 18 months, acquired 5 traditional companies. Impressive, if we didn't know that each of these acquisitions was carefully prepared by my team." The group of senior executives surrounding the table watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and compassion. They knew that look of Harrison's well, the same one that had revolutionized entire industries in recent decades. "But why?" Richard managed to articulate, his voice trembling slightly. "Why let us buy these companies if everything was already yours?" A subtle smile appeared on Harrison's lips. "Have you ever played chess, gentlemen? The true power of the game isn't in moving the pieces, but in understanding why each move is made." At this moment, Michelle Andrews, a respected figure in the GE financial market and part of the Harrison Group's executive board, approached with an elegant folder. "The reports you requested, Mr. Harrison." "Ah, yes. The most interesting part of our little experiment," he commented, opening the folder. "You consider yourselves the new generation of business leaders. You took control of traditional companies, replaced experienced employees with young talents, cut development programs you considered outdated." Each word was like a needle piercing the bubble of superiority that the group had built around themselves. The documents that Harrison now spread across the table told a different story from the triumphant headlines that had graced business magazines. Productivity declining, employee turnover at alarming levels, organizational climate deteriorated, and most concerning, innovation stagnated, listed Harrison, his voice maintaining a professorial tone. "Do you know why? Because you confused modernity with wisdom." Charles Wilson, the executive who had apparently lost his company to the group, stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison approached me 6 months ago when you initiated the hostile acquisition. He had a different plan in mind." "A mentoring plan," completed Harrison, leaning back in his chair. "Each company you conquered was actually a carefully designed stage of an executive development program. Without your knowledge, you were being evaluated, tested, and educated." The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The waiters had stopped serving, the other customers abandoned their conversations. The lesson unfolding was too valuable to be missed. "Arrogance is the first sign of incompetence," continued Harrison, his voice now softer. "You have potential, that's undeniable. You have energy, ambition, and even some talent for business. But you've confused quick success with true leadership." Michelle Andrews began distributing new folders to each of the young executives. "These are the real numbers of the companies you've managed in recent months, including projections for the next 5 years if you continue on the current path." The numbers were frightening. What had seemed like a series of brilliant conquests now revealed itself as a sequence of myopic decisions that compromised the future of the organizations. "But not all is lost," announced Harrison, rising slowly. "In fact, this is where the real opportunity begins." The young executives exchanged confused looks. They expected punishment, public humiliation, the end of their careers. Instead, Harrison seemed to offer something different. Starting tomorrow, each of you will be assigned to a mentor from our executive board. You will learn not just about business, but about true leadership, about building something that lasts longer than magazine headlines. The veteran adjusted his worn suit, that piece that carried as many stories as its owner. And if you accept this challenge, if you really commit to learning, well, let's say that the Harrison Group is always looking for true leaders. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to castaways. It was more than a second chance. It was a learning opportunity that few received. So, gentlemen, concluded Harrison, his eyes scanning each young face before him, do you still think the market belongs only to the young? Or are you ready to learn that true wisdom comes from the union between experience and innovation? Morning arrived with a fine mist covering the skyscrapers of the financial center. Richard Thornton observed the city awakening from the 50th floor of the Harrison building, his hands nervously clutching the Italian leather executive briefcase that now seemed absurdly ostentatious. First lesson, Michelle Andrews' voice sounded behind him, making him turn quickly. Arriving early doesn't mean arriving first. The executive was already installed at her desk, various reports organized in front of her. Mr. Harrison has been here since 5. Richard consulted his Rolex, 6:30 in the morning. He had arrived 2 hours before business hours, thinking to impress. A discreet smile on Michelle's lips made it clear that it wasn't enough. On the other side of the floor, Philip Montgomery faced a stack of yellow documents that Charles Wilson had placed on his desk. Records of all important decisions of the Harrison Group over the last 30 years, explained the veteran. Before coffee, I want your analysis of the investment patterns of the 90s. But there are hundreds of pages, protested Philip, receiving only a serene look from Wilson. Second lesson, information is power only when you know how to interpret it. In the main meeting room, Alexander Harrison observed the city through the panoramic windows, his reflection superimposed on the urban landscape. His worn suit contrasted dramatically with the minimalist elegance of the environment. Curious, he murmured to himself, how some need to lose everything they thought they had to start gaining something true. The day unfolded like an intensive, practical lesson in humility and competence. Each young executive was assigned to a different area of the conglomerate, under the watchful supervision of their respective mentors. Laura Mitchell, the only woman in the group of young executives, found herself managing a crisis in the technology division. A crucial server had failed, threatening to interrupt operations in 3 states. Solve it, was Michelle Andrews' only instruction, watching as Laura alternated between computer screens and phone calls. After 4 hours of intense work, Laura had not only stabilized the system, but also implemented a backup protocol that could prevent similar problems in the future. Third lesson, commented Michelle, offering her a cup of coffee. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions to the right people. In the financial department, Richard discovered that his vaunted expertise in mergers and acquisitions had serious gaps. Each document he analyzed revealed layers of complexity he had never considered. The numbers are just the surface, explained Sarah Fraser, financial director of the group, while pointing out inconsistencies in his analyses. The true value of a company is in its people, its culture, the knowledge accumulated over the years. In the afternoon, Alexander Harrison gathered everyone in the main conference room. Fatigue was visible on the young faces, but there was something more, a beginning of understanding, perhaps even respect. Impressions of the first day, he asked, serving himself water in a simple glass. It's different from what we expected, admitted Philip, his words carefully chosen. Different how? Pressed Harrison, an interested gleam in his eyes. Laura was the first to really answer. There are no shortcuts here. Each decision, each number, each strategy, everything has a history, a context that we need to understand. Now you begin to see, smiled Harrison. The corporate world isn't a 100-meter dash. It's a marathon that requires preparation, resistance and, above all, wisdom to know when to accelerate and when to conserve energy. Richard, who had spent the morning poring over complex financial analyses, hesitantly raised his hand. Mr. Harrison, why did you choose to give us this chance? After everything we did, the way we acted, the veteran businessman adjusted his worn tie, a habit that everyone was beginning to recognize as his moment of reflection. Because I saw in you something that reminded me of myself 40 years ago. The same hunger, the same certainty that we could change the world just with our will. He paused, his eyes scanning each face in the room. The difference is that I had mentors who showed me that will without wisdom is like a powerful car without steering. It impresses for a moment, but inevitably ends in destruction. Sarah Fraser completed, and now it's our turn to pass on what we've learned. The afternoon sun cast elongated shadows through the windows, creating a play of light and shadow that seemed to symbolize the very learning process they were experiencing, areas of clarity and mystery, knowledge and doubt. For tomorrow, announced Harrison, standing up, I want each of you to prepare a complete analysis of the mistakes you made in your previous managements. I'm not looking for superficial self-criticism, but a deep understanding of the impact of your decisions on the lives of the people who depended on you. As the young executives absorbed the task, Michelle added, and don't worry about formatting or elaborate presentations. We want substance, not appearance. It was a subtle jab at the style they so prized, the glossy reports, the presentations full of effects, the impressive graphics that often masked the lack of real content. At the end of the day, when the last ray of sun abandoned the horizon, Richard remained for an additional moment, observing the city that now seemed different to his eyes. His reflection in the glass showed a changed man, still young, still ambitious, but beginning to understand that there was much more to learn than he had imagined. The meeting room on the 48th floor was silent as Laura Mitchell finished her presentation. The last few weeks had left subtle marks on her appearance. The designer blazer had been replaced by a more discreet one, and her eyes carried a new kind of determination. And that's how I discovered that our acquisition of tech solutions resulted in the dismissal of the entire development team that had created the original software. Her voice trembled slightly. 53 families affected by a decision I made without understanding the true value of human capital. Alexander Harrison, seated at the head of the table, nodded silently. Beside him, Michelle Andrews made detailed notes, her face revealing approval for the young executive's honesty. Continue, instructed Harrison, turning to the others. Richard Thornton rose next, his hands slightly trembling as he distributed his reports. The Rolex he had so flaunted was notably absent from his wrist. My analysis revealed that our cost-cutting policy at Meridian Industries destroyed training programs that took decades to develop, he admitted. In the pursuit of quarterly results, we compromised the future of the company. Philip Montgomery, who had spent the last few days immersed in the historical archives of the Harrison Group, raised his hand. Mr. Harrison, I found something in the records that completely changed my perspective. Continue, encouraged the veteran, a gleam of interest in his eyes. In 1992, during the biggest economic crisis of the decade, you kept all employees, even with significant losses. Analysts predicted the group's bankruptcy, but 3 years later, completed Sarah Fraser, that same team developed the innovation that revolutionized our industry. People who trust the company give their best for it. The silence that followed was dense with meaning. Each young executive seemed lost in their own reflections, confronting the consequences of their past actions. You begin to understand, Harrison finally spoke, rising from his chair. The true cost of arrogance isn't financial, it's human. Walking to the window, he continued, when I took control of the group, I was little older than you. I had the same certainties, the same rush. It took a very special mentor to show me that companies aren't made of spreadsheets and presentations. Michelle opened an old folder, extracting a yellowed photograph. In it, a young Alexander Harrison smiled alongside a gray-haired gentleman, both wearing simple suits. Anthony Grayson, presented Harrison, his voice laden with respect. The man who taught me that leadership is about serving, not dominating, who showed me how to transform competitors into allies and employees into family. Laura studied the photograph carefully. It's the same suit you wear to this day, isn't it? A soft smile illuminated the veteran's face, a gift from him, "The day I assumed the presidency of the group, to never forget where you came from," were his words. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Charles Wilson entered hurriedly, his face tense. "Mr. Harrison, we have a situation. Johnson Corporation is threatening to break our strategic partnership in Asia." The young executives exchanged glances, tense. Johnson Corporation was one of the group's largest partners, responsible for 30% of international operations. "Perfect," declared Harrison to everyone's surprise. "Ms. Mitchell, Messrs. Thornton and Montgomery, this will be your first real mission. You have 1 hour to study the situation and propose a solution." But sir," stuttered Richard, "this is a billion-dollar negotiation. We can't." "Fair fourth lesson," interrupted Michelle, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "The moment to prove. Your worth rarely comes when you feel prepared." During the following hour, the meeting room transformed into a command center. Laura coordinated the analysis of contracts while Philip immersed himself in the history of the relationship between the companies. Richard, surprising everyone, focused on understanding the human impact on Asian operations. When Harrison returned, he found not 3 frightened young executives, but a cohesive team presenting an innovative solution. Instead of confronting Johnson, "We propose a restructuring of the partnership," explained Laura. "Our studies show that we can create a new joint venture model that benefits both parties and, more importantly, protects jobs in both organizations." Richard complimented. "We analyzed the joint development programs and identified expansion opportunities that have been ignored in recent years. And most interestingly," concluded Philip, "we found in the archives a similar model implemented by you in 1988, which can be adapted to the current scenario." Harrison listened to everything in silence, his face impassive. When the presentation ended, he turned to Michelle and Sarah, who exchanged satisfied looks. "Perhaps," he said finally, "there's hope for you after all." The video conference room of the Harrison Group was prepared for the virtual meeting with the executives of Johnson Corporation. Laura Mitchell nervously adjusted her documents while Richard Thornton checked the numbers in his spreadsheet for the 10th time. Philip Montgomery, in turn, carefully studied the notes on the history of the partnership between the companies. Alexander Harrison observed the trio discreetly from the back of the room, his worn suit contrasting with the high-tech environment. Michelle Andrews and Sarah Fraser flanked the young executives, ready to intervene if necessary, but determined to let them conduct the negotiation. 2 minutes, announced the IT technician, adjusting the final configurations. Laura took a deep breath, remembering Harrison's words. "Negotiations aren't battles to be won, they're bridges to be built." The large screens lit up, revealing Robert Johnson Jr. and his executive team in their office in Hong Kong. The heir to the Johnson Empire seemed as young and arrogant as they themselves had been weeks ago, an irony that didn't go unnoticed. "Well," began Robert, his tone already combative, "I'm curious to see how the Harrison Group intends to justify the recent discrepancies in our joint operations." Laura stepped forward, surprising everyone with her calmness. "Mr. Johnson, before we discuss numbers and contracts, I'd like to share something we discovered in the last few days." She made a gesture, and Philip projected an old photograph on the screens. In it, Robert Johnson Sr., the current CEO's father, shook hands with a young Alexander Harrison. "This photo was taken in 1988 when our companies first united," explained Laura. "Your father and Mr. Harrison didn't just create a commercial partnership, they established a commitment to thousands of families on 2 continents." Robert Jr. adjusted himself in his chair, visibly affected by the image of his father. Richard seized the moment to present his data. "In the last 5 years, our companies together have generated more than 10,000 direct jobs in Asia. We've developed training programs that have become a reference in the sector. We've created entire communities around our joint operations. And that's why," completed Philip, "we've come to propose not a commercial agreement, but a renewal of the commitment that our predecessors established." During the following 2 hours, the young executives presented their restructuring proposal. It wasn't just a business plan, it was a vision of the future that honored the legacy of both companies while embracing innovation. To everyone's surprise, Robert Johnson Jr. began to actively engage in the discussion. His initial combative tone gave way to genuine interest, especially when Laura presented a joint technological development program that would benefit both companies. "This reminds me of something my father always said," commented Robert, his posture more relaxed. He believed that the true value of a partnership isn't in contracts, but in mutual trust. From the back of the room, Harrison smiled discreetly. The young executives weren't just negotiating, they were building bridges exactly as he had taught. The meeting ended with a preliminary agreement not only to maintain the partnership, but to expand it. Robert Johnson Jr., visibly impressed, made one last comment before ending the call. "Mr. Harrison, I see you continue to form exceptional leaders." When the screens went off, a reflective silence took over the room. Michelle was the first to break it. "Fifth lesson. Sometimes to advance, we need to look back and understand the foundations that brought us here." Sarah complimented. "You didn't just save a strategic partnership, you strengthened it by understanding its true meaning." Harrison approached the trio, his eyes shining with approval. "When I came into this room, I saw 3 nervous young executives. Now I see 3 leaders beginning to understand the true meaning of their responsibility." Laura, Richard, and Philip exchanged knowing looks. The transformation they were experiencing went far beyond corporate strategies or numbers in spreadsheets. It was a profound change in their understanding of what it meant to be a leader. "Mr. Harrison," called Laura, hesitant, "that photo of you with Mr. Johnson Sr., were you already wearing the same suit?" The veteran smiled, smoothing his worn lapel. "No, that was another suit, but it carried the same principle as this one. Humility isn't a weakness, it's the source of true strength." As the team began to organize the documents from the meeting, Richard noticed something curious. His Rolex, stored in a drawer for days, wasn't missed so much anymore. Somehow, time had gained a new meaning, no longer measured in fiscal quarters or short-term goals, but in lives impacted and legacies built. A week after the success in the negotiation with Johnson Corporation, the atmosphere in the Harrison Group office was one of cautious optimism. The morning sun illuminated Laura Mitchell's office, where she analyzed a proposal that would have made her former self leap with excitement. "It's a tempting offer," commented Michelle Andrews, watching. The young executive read the email for the 3rd time. "The largest investment fund in the country wants you to lead their technology division. The salary is 3 times your current compensation." Laura raised her eyes from the notebook, her face revealing the internal conflict she was experiencing. 2 months ago, I would have accepted without thinking twice. "And now?" asked Michelle, although her smile suggested she already knew the answer. Before Laura could respond, Richard Thornton burst into the room, his normally composed face betraying unusual agitation. "You need to see this." On the main screen in Mancintuantionte, the meeting room, a financial channel report, showed images of what appeared to be a peaceful demonstration in front of one of the Harrison Group's factories. "The employees at the Riverside unit are concerned," explained Richard. "Rumors have emerged that we'll sell the factory to an international conglomerate that plans to automate all production." Philip Montgomery, who had just arrived, added, "It's our oldest factory. 3 generations of families work there. The entire region's economy depends on it." Alexander Harrison observed the scene from the door, his worn suit seeming more significant than ever. "So?" His calm voice cut through the tension in the room. "What do you suggest?" The 3 young executives looked at each other. It was a test, obviously, one more of the many they had been facing. But this time, they felt the real weight of their decisions. "We need to go there," declared Laura, surprising everyone with her conviction. "We can't make decisions that affect thousands of lives by just looking at spreadsheets in an air-conditioned office." Richard nodded, already grabbing his tablet. "I have the factory's numbers from the last 5 years. Productivity is stable, but there's room for improvement without the need for massive automation." "And I," completed Philip, "have spent enough time in the archives to know that that unit has faced similar challenges in the past. In 1995, there was a similar automation proposal." Harrison stepped forward, his eyes shining with interest. And what happened in 1995, Mr. Montgomery? You refused total automation, replied Philip, consulting his notes. Instead, you implemented a professional requalification program. The employees themselves suggested improvements to the production process that increased efficiency by 40%. Laura stood up, an idea taking shape in her mind. What if we did something similar? Not just maintain jobs, but invest in people. In the following hours, the meeting room transformed into a planning center. Michelle and Sarah observed with approval as the young executives developed a plan that went far beyond simple numbers. We can create an innovation center within the factory itself, explained Laura, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Use the experience of older employees combined with new technologies. Richard, who had completely abandoned his former arrogant posture, added, the initial cost would be higher than automation, but the long-term return, not just financial, but in human capital and knowledge, and the social impact, completed Philip. We wouldn't just be preserving jobs, but creating new opportunities for the entire region. Harrison listened to everything in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he addressed Laura. And what about that proposal from the investment fund, Ms. Mitchell? Laura straightened in her chair, surprised that he knew about the offer, but her answer came without hesitation. A few years ago, I learned that money is a terrible measure for the real value of things. A rare smile illuminated the veteran businessman's face. Sixth lesson. The most important choices in our lives are rarely between right and wrong. They're between right and easy. Michelle approached with an old folder. I think you should see this before finalizing the plan. Inside the folder were old photographs of the Riverside factory, including one that caught everyone's attention. A young Alexander Harrison, wearing his famous worn suit, talking with a group of workers during the 1995 crisis. I was the chief engineer at the factory at the time, revealed Sarah Fraser, her voice laden with emotion. That requalification program changed my life. And now look, financial director of the group. The young executives absorbed the information in silence, understanding one more layer of the complex web of relationships and decisions that had built the Harrison empire. The sun had not yet risen when the Harrison Group delegation arrived at the Riverside factory. Laura Mitchell observed through the car window the first employees arriving for the morning shift, their silhouettes cut against the sky that was beginning to lighten. Look, pointed Philip Montgomery to a group of older workers. Those must be from Sarah's time here. Richard Thornton consulted his notes on the tablet. Joseph Oliver, Mary Grace, Peter Simpson. They've been with the company for more than 30 years. They're part of the second generation of their families to work here. Alexander Harrison, who had insisted on accompanying them, adjusted his worn suit before getting out of the car. Let's see if you've really learned something in the last few weeks. The group was received by Charles Wilson, who had arrived the day before to prepare the ground. The administration hall was full, union representatives, community leaders, and long-time employees anxiously awaited. Ms. Mitchell, called Harrison. Why don't you start? Laura stepped forward, conscious of all the eyes on her. 2 months ago, she would have started with a PowerPoint presentation full of impressive graphics. Now she did something different. Before presenting any proposal, she began, we would like to hear from you. Nobody knows this factory better than the people who have dedicated their lives to it. A murmur of surprise ran through the environment. Joseph Oliver, a grey-haired gentleman, was the first to speak up. Miss, he said, his voice carrying decades of experience. I started here as an apprentice, following in my father's footsteps. My son works in maintenance now. This factory isn't just a workplace, it's part of our history. Mary Grace, supervisor of quality control, added, we heard they want to robotize everything, that there's no more room for people like us. Richard intervened, his former arrogance replaced by genuine humility. Actually, we've come to propose something different. But first, we'd like one thing. Can you show us the factory? Not through reports or numbers, but through your eyes. The next few hours were a true lesson in history and humanity. Each sector visited revealed not just industrial processes, but life stories. Peter Simpson proudly showed the improvements that 3 generations of operators had implemented in his production line. Mary explained how the traditional knowledge of older employees had been fundamental in maintaining quality during crises. "See this," pointed Joseph to a mark on the maintenance wall. "1995, Mr. Harrison spent 3 days here with us, learning every detail of the operation before making any decision about automation." Laura, Richard, and Philip exchanged significant looks. History was repeating itself, but now they were on the other side. During lunch in the employee cafeteria, Laura finally presented the plan they had developed, not in a meeting room, but among the people who would be directly affected by it. "We don't want to replace you with machines," she explained. "We want to create an innovation center right here, where the knowledge of those who built this factory can unite with new technologies." Richard detailed how the requalification program would work. Each employee will have the opportunity to specialize to evolve along with the company. We're not talking about replacement, but evolution. "And most importantly," completed Philip, "we want you to be an active part of this process. Who better than you to decide how to modernize each sector?" The silence that followed was interrupted by an unexpected sound. Applause. Not protocol applause from a corporate presentation, but the genuine manifestation of people who finally felt heard and respected. Joseph Oliver stood up, emotional. "In 1995, Mr. Harrison gave us a chance to prove our worth. We transformed this factory together. If you're offering the same opportunity, you can count on us." Harrison, who observed everything discreetly, approached Laura. "Seventh lesson, sometimes the greatest innovation isn't in technology, but in how we treat people." At the end of the day, as the sun set over the factory, the young executives remained for an extra moment in the yard. They observed the night shift employees arriving, greeting their day colleagues, keeping alive the cycle that had built not just a company, but a community. "You know," reflected Laura, "when I entered the corporate world, I thought success was about increasing numbers in quarterly reports." "And now?" asked Richard, already knowing the answer. "Now I understand that it's about leaving a legacy, about building something that transcends financial statements." Philip smiled, pointing to Harrison's worn suit, who was talking with a group of long-time employees. "I think we finally understand why he never changed that suit." "Why?" questioned Richard. "Because some things don't need to be changed," answered Laura. "They need to be honored and preserved, while we evolve around them." The main auditorium of the Business Association was packed. Executives from across the country had gathered for the annual Business Innovation Forum, but the buzz that ran through the environment wasn't about technology or numbers, it was about the recent changes in the Harrison Group. Laura Mitchell adjusted the microphone on her discreet blazer while observing the audience. Beside her, Richard Thornton and Philip Montgomery reviewed their notes. The three had been invited to share their experience in the transformation of the Riverside factory. "They're all here," whispered Philip, consulting the participant list. "CEOs of the largest companies in the country, investment funds, international consultants." Alexander Harrison, seated in the first row with his inseparable worn suit, discreetly waved to them. Michelle Andrews and Sarah Fraser at his side smiled encouragingly. Laura stepped forward on the stage, remembering how she used to carry herself in presentations like this, all the arrogance and superficiality that now seemed to belong to another life. "3 months ago," she began, her voice firm, "I was, sitting where you are, convinced I knew everything about business innovation. I talked about disruption, automation, operational efficiency, but had no idea what it truly meant to innovate." The auditorium lights dimmed, and images of the Riverside factory filled the screens. They weren't graphs or spreadsheets, they were faces, stories, lives. Richard took the microphone. "When we were challenged to modernize our oldest factory, our first response was predictable: total automation, replacement of the workforce, efficiency metrics." "The easy path," completed Philip. "The same that any consultant or management manual would recommend." But then we learned a valuable lesson about the true meaning of innovation. During the following hour, they shared not just numbers and results, but the profound transformation they had experienced. How the factory's innovation center, led by the employees themselves, had not only maintained productivity, but revolutionized processes that expensive consultants would never have thought to modify. Mr. Oliver, with 30 years of experience on the production line, developed a preventive maintenance system that reduced our technical stops by 60%, explained Laura. Ms. Grace, our quality supervisor, implemented a mentoring program that united traditional knowledge with new technologies. An executive in the audience raised her hand. But how do you justify to shareholders a larger investment in people when automation would be cheaper in the short term? Richard smiled, remembering how he himself would have asked that question months ago. Let me show you something interesting. The numbers projected on the screens told a convincing story. After 3 months, the Riverside factory had not only maintained its productivity, but presented innovation and continuous improvement indexes superior to more modern and automated units. But most importantly, intervened Philip, is something that doesn't appear in financial reports. He made a significant pause. The factory has become a regional development hub. Local universities have established partnerships for internship. Programs, small suppliers, have been integrated into the production chain, and a new generation of professionals is being trained with a unique balance between tradition and innovation. From the back of the auditorium, a familiar voice spoke up. It was Robert Johnson Jr., who had flown specially from Hong Kong for the event. After our renewed partnership with the Harrison Group, he declared, we implemented a similar program in our factories in Asia. The results have been revolutionary. Laura noticed a gleam of pride in Harrison's eyes. It wasn't just, a factory being transformed. It was an entire way of thinking about business and leadership. 8th lesson, she shared, quoting her mentor. Innovation without humanity is like a car without steering. It might impress for a moment, but inevitably leads to disaster. After the presentation, as participants gathered for coffee, Laura noticed something interesting. Several executives had removed their expensive ties, some even their designer blazers. It was as if Harrison's worn suit had triggered a reflection on the true symbols of power and success. Ms. Mitchell, called a CEO of a multinational, would you like to visit our factory in Burlington? Perhaps we have something to learn from you. Richard and Philip exchanged glances, surprised by the impact their words had caused. It wasn't just a corporate presentation. It was the beginning of a cultural change. Michelle approached the trio with an enigmatic smile. You realize what's happening, don't you? What? Asked Philip. You're no longer just learning lessons, she replied. You're beginning to teach them. The meeting room on the 50th floor of the Harrison building was different that morning. Where before there were only senior executives, now a diverse group of professionals occupied the chairs. Engineers from the Riverside factory, managers from different levels, and even some newly hired interns. Laura Mitchell observed the scene with a discreet smile, remembering her first time in that same room months ago. Richard Thornton, beside her, no longer obsessively consulted his tablet. He was busy attentively listening to suggestions from a young maintenance technician. It's amazing how things have changed, commented Philip Montgomery, organizing the meeting agendas. I remember when we thought sitting in this room was a privilege reserved only for senior management. Alexander Harrison entered silently, his worn suit contrasting as always with the sophisticated environment. But now everyone understood the significance of that piece of clothing. It was no longer an object of mockery, but a symbol of values that were beginning to transform the entire company. Good morning, everyone, he began, his voice carrying that quiet authority they had learned to respect. Today isn't an ordinary meeting. It's an important milestone in the history of the Harrison Group. Michelle Andrews and Sarah Fraser exchanged complicit looks as they distributed folders to everyone present. Inside them was something that made Laura catch her breath, the proposal for a new organizational structure for the entire group. In recent months, continued Harrison, we've witnessed a remarkable transformation, not just in our Riverside factory, but in our entire way of thinking and doing business. And this, he made a significant pause, has led me to an important decision. The veteran businessman stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. When I assumed leadership of this group 4 decades ago, I received a valuable gift from my mentor, this suit. Along with it came a responsibility to preserve not just a company but a set of values. Laura, Richard and Philip exchanged glances, feeling the weight of the moment. In recent weeks, they had visited various companies, sharing their experiences and learnings. The Riverside model was becoming a case study in business schools, and other companies were beginning to implement similar programs. Now, Harrison turned to face the room. It's time to pass that legacy forward. Laura, Richard, Philip, you are no longer just executives in training. From today, you are the new directors of the Harrison Group. A murmur of surprise ran through the room, but was quickly replaced by smiles of approval. It wasn't an unexpected decision. It was the natural recognition of a transformation that everyone had witnessed. But there's one condition, he added, a playful gleam in his eyes. From a box that Michelle was carrying, he took out 3 simple packages. In each of them was a suit, not new and elegant, but purposely worn, each with its own history. These belonged to executives who helped build this company over the decades. People who understood that true leadership isn't in appearance but in essence. Laura received her suit with trembling hands, recognizing it immediately. It had belonged to the first female financial director of the group, a pioneer in her time. Richard and Philip also received theirs, each carrying a unique story of leadership and values. "Ninth lesson," declared Harrison, his voice laden with contained emotion. "The true inheritance of a leader isn't in the goods accumulated, but in the values transmitted." Joseph Oliver, representing the Riverside employees, stood up to speak. "When you came to the factory, we thought it was the end of an era. Now we see it was just the beginning of something new, something better." The meeting continued with discussions about new projects and challenges they would face. But there was something different in the air, a deep understanding that they were participating in something greater than themselves. "Mr. Harrison," called Laura when the meeting ended, "are you really retiring?" The veteran smiled, adjusting his worn suit. "Retire? No, Miss Mitchell. I'm just changing my role. Now I'll be the mentor you need, just as someone once was for me." As participants left the room, Michelle approached the trio of new directors. "Last lesson of the day, leadership isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey, and you're just beginning." The sun was rising over the city when Laura Mitchell entered her new office in the Harrison Group Directorate. Her inherited suit, with its own marks of time, now carried a special meaning. On the wall, she had ordered a photograph hung of the former director who had worn it, a constant reminder of the legacy that was now her responsibility to preserve. Across the hall, Richard Thornton organized his new office. His old Rolex had been replaced by a simple watch, a gift from the Riverside employees. On his desk, besides financial reports, were letters and suggestions from collaborators at all levels, a practice he had instituted on his first day as director. Philip Montgomery, in turn, had transformed his office into a collaboration space. The walls displayed the group's history and photographs, including that first image of Harrison with his mentor. It was a living memorial of the values they had learned to honor. "Good morning, directors," Alexander Harrison's familiar voice echoed, down the hallway. He still arrived before everyone else, his worn suit as much a part of him as his principles. "Ready for your first big challenge, Ms. Mitchell?" he asked, a familiar gleam in his eyes. Laura smiled, knowing exactly what he was talking about. That morning, a group of young executives from a trainee program would begin their training in the group. Among them was an ambitious young woman who reminded her very much of herself months ago. "You know," she said, adjusting the photo on her wall, "I never imagined I would be on the other side of this story." The main meeting room was prepared to receive the new trainees. Laura, Richard and Philip now occupied the places that previously belonged to Michelle, Sarah and Charles. Harrison, as always, maintained his discreet place at the back of the room. The young executives entered, their designer clothes and confident posture painfully echoing the trio's memories. The young woman Laura had mentioned, Amanda Turner, stood out for her determined expression and the latest model tablet she constantly consulted. "Welcome to the Harrison Group," began Laura, her voice carrying a gentle authority she had learned from her mentor. You were selected from among thousands of candidates, not just for your technical skills, but for something we saw in each of you, a potential for true leadership. Richard continued, "In the coming weeks, you will go through a unique development program. Don't expect PowerPoint presentations or abstract theories about management. Instead," completed Philip, "you will learn through experience. We'll begin where every great journey should begin, on the factory floor." Amanda Turner couldn't contain her surprise. "But we're executives. Surely our time would be better spent on strategic projects." Laura exchanged a knowing look with Harrison before responding. "Ms. Turner, let me tell you a story about 3 young executives who, a few months ago, thought exactly like you. The following hours were dedicated to sharing not just the transformation they had lived, but primarily the lessons they had learned. They talked about Riverside, about Johnson Corporation, about the changes that were revolutionizing the market. At Hui, at the end of the morning, as the trainees prepared for their first visit to the factory, Amanda approached Laura. "Director Mitchell," she began, hesitant, "I couldn't help but notice your suit." Laura smiled, smoothing the worn lapel. "What? Do you see when you look at it, Ms. Turner? Well, honestly, it looks old, unfashionable." "10th and final lesson," Harrison's voice sounded behind them. "The most valuable things in life are rarely those that shine the brightest." As the group headed to the elevators, Laura remained for an extra moment in the meeting room. On the table before her was a recent photograph. She, Richard, and Philip wearing their inherited suits, alongside Harrison with his eternal worn suit. Behind them, the Riverside. Factory served as the backdrop, with its smiling employees completing the image. "The circle continues," murmured Harrison, standing at the door, "and so it should be." Laura nodded, finally understanding the true meaning of her journey. It wasn't about personal success or corporate power. It was about preserving values, building bridges between generations, and above all, keeping alive a legacy of humanized leadership. "Shall we?" called Richard, already in the hallway. "The trainees are waiting." As they walked to another day of work, Laura realized that their lives had changed in a way that no MBA or leadership course could have provided. They had learned that true power isn't in the clothes we wear or the positions we hold, but in the ability to touch and transform lives. And so, the man in the worn suit had fulfilled his most important mission, not just to preserve a company, but to plant the seeds of a new generation of leaders who understood that business in the end is about people. Dear listeners, we hope that the transformation journey of Laura, Richard, and Philip has touched your hearts and inspired reflections on leadership and values in the corporate world. To continue exploring stories that make us rethink our vision of success and professional fulfillment, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging narratives. Find it here, clicking on the left. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships in the professional environment. Share in the comments your own experiences of transformation and learning. We continue together on this journey of discovery,